Right, so what kind of information do you want to track about these reference data lists? So at a conceptual level, right, so having sort of a group name, and that previous example, your group name might be, we're tracking employee statuses, a description, like what is the point of this? Oh, this, you know, what does this mean? What are we trying to do here? What domain is it in? Oh, the employee status is in the human resources domain. Now, why do we do that? In our system, that has a really key area in understanding ownership and routing, so that if a value is changed in this list, or there's some issue or question or request associated with this list, the domain would likely tell you, like, well, who is the steward, or the steward group that gets, oh, we have a HR data steward or whatever that gets routed to. So it's important to understand that from an ownership standpoint. You might have an explicit ownership, which is better than nothing, but I don't encourage that, where you say, oh, this list is owned by a particular person. But it's better to understand, like, what kind of the attributes of this that can map to a particular thing. Related data systems. So what if we have this conceptual list? What data systems would I find this list in, right? And that could be so that you could build out those specific things, or have sort of a to-do item for those lists. A version status. So, oh, I've got an approved list of these 5 employee statuses that we use. And if someone comes along and recommends another or a change to one of them, you can create a new version and approve that and move on. Owners, as I just said, you could track that as a direct one, or it could be derived from a workflow or management from the attributes of these things between data systems and functional domains. For a specific list, right, the individual lists within a group, and you can have, you could, for reasons, there's, the conceptual list and the specific list could be, you could just have one list in it, and that could be fine. It's just that once you start having more than one system where it's stored in, you want to think about blowing that out into a group. But the individual list, what group is it in, right? What's the data system that this list manages? Or if it's external, like, what is the agency? It doesn't have to be a specific system. You could have a list that's like for reporting. I'm sending this data to the federal government or a state report, and that could be the list. It doesn't have to be a data system. It could be an agency or external thing. Is this the master list? If you are tracking it that way. List instance specific description notes. So within that list, are there specific notes or description of this list that is useful to understand that? What are the current values in that list, the version and status of that, and the version history there. For each of the individual values in the list, you want to have what is the actual code or value of it? So if it's like, A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, or active, inactive. A key if it's different from the code. So maybe you're in the database you're looking at, like, it's externally represented the user as ABCD, but it's actually, there's a GUID or something, it's the key is like 1, 2, 3, 4 in the table. That's a good thing to track. Description. So is there a readable description instead of ABCD? It's like active, whatever those things are. A definition or a long description. So active would be the description, but there would be something that would say, like, an active employee is an employee that is, currently active in at least one job, blah, 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 blah. Some sort of description there. And then roll up info. If this particular code rolls up to another parent code, like, so this is a list of departments, but, in a GL number, it's, if we're managing that, that can be useful. And then does it map to a master value? So if it's connected to another, for this specific list, I've got this thing called A for active, and it maps to the what we call active in our master list. And then the value in active, flag, and date. So if you, rather than sort of removing a code, if it's no longer a code you use, marking it as inactive and when it became inactive can be very helpful. So that if you're encountering values with the old value in your system, it's kind of obvious to you, oh, that's mapping to an inactive value, as opposed to like, oh, there's a new value here, should I consider that? And you don't lose that. So inactivating things is a useful thing to do. So, in our system, for a specific list, like, you might have these grades, you have A, B, C, D, you have a description that maps up to a roll up to this pass fail value. That's like a code type, and an active flag and an active date if you had that there. employee statuses, if you're tracking this on your own, you might have a code. There might be a key associated with that, a description, a definition, an active, and then a master value it maps to an active flag. So depending on how you want to track these, this is kind of how that list might represent. And then as you saw here, you could have a master list and say that these values map to, what do they map to? Or if that's the master list, how they map to that master list there. The next thing that's useful to track is the technical details. So we described that in a particular data system, what are the actual values? But if you want to kind of take another step, you could track like where do the actual values live? Or another way to think about this is if I was going to automate the synchronization or discovery of what values are currently in that system, how would I do that? Our tool has what we call a reference data synchronization process, where you can define your reference data list, say where they live in the data system and how frequently you want it to synchronize, and it'll connect that data system through our integration suite middleware. It uses query to either manufacturer's query, or you can enter a query to pull the active list of code values and descriptions, or whatever is in that data system, and then compares it to the list that's currently approved in the system. If there's a new value, it'll create a new version and start a workflow for someone to evaluate and approve and review that system. In order to make that work, there is sort of two ways that we really think about storing this technically, whether it's what actual sort of table or column it lives in. So it might be that this is talking about departments. There is a table in this particular data system called STV-dept, and in that table there's a code field and a description field. And maybe you have a field that's something that says whether it's active or inactive or a date, if you want to do that. So you're just defining where that lives. And in our system, if you've created these things, that's all you really need to do, and it'll generate the queries to automate the pulling that in. You might also say, hey, instead I'm going to do this with a query, and then you could just write a query that pulls back the same, whatever information you can. Sometimes it might be that you don't have a specific table storing that. Maybe you're doing sort of a distinct set of values from some other query or some other method of pulling in that list. But the point here is how would I find what is the actual active list of values that are available in that data system as well. And maybe there might be other sources that are sort of enum things that are stored in other ways, and those are things that you can track. Oh, this is in a XML validation table, or those are defined or whatever. If you do have this in our tool, and I don't know about other tools, but we have the ability then to say whether or not you're going to turn on or off the synchronization controls and how often you want it to synchronize when that happens.